That isn't even your name. Captain Ryan Mercer held the bent dog tag between two gloved fingers as though it were something pulled from the bottom of a harbor. His voice carried across Pier 12, sharp enough to cut through the brass band warming up beside the USS Resolute. Conversations faded. Sailors turned. A television crew shifted its camera toward the security checkpoint, where an old man in a weathered navy blue coat stood beneath the hard white glare of the morning sun. Walter Hayes did not reach for the tag. At 82, he had learned that hurried hands often revealed more than words. His silver hair moved in the salt wind, but the rest of him remained still. "I know," he said. The answer unsettled Mercer more than any denial could have. Behind them, the destroyer towered above the pier, its steel hull dressed in signal flags for the recommissioning ceremony. Hundreds of guests waited beyond the barricades. Officers in polished uniforms crossed the deck. In less than 20 minutes, Admiral Thomas Caldwell would deliver the address that every major military network had come to record. Mercer had been assigned to keep the ceremony flawless, and the quiet stranger before him was becoming an imperfection he could not explain. "Then why are you wearing it?" he asked. Walter's pale eyes settled on the small piece of scorched metal. A deep bend ran through its center, and one edge was darkened as if it had rested too close to something unbearably hot. The front carried a faded service number. The back carried a name, Lieutenant Daniel Caldwell. "I came to return it," Walter said. Mercer glanced at the sealed envelope in the old man's hand, yellowed at the corners and softened by time. "To whom?" "Tom Caldwell." A few sailors nearby exchanged looks. Mercer gave a short laugh without humor. "You mean Admiral Caldwell?" Walter did not correct him. That silence felt, to Mercer, like insolence. He turned to the tablet held by Petty Officer Emily Brooks. "Check the guest list again." Emily searched carefully. Walter watched the ship instead of the screen. His gaze moved along the forward superstructure, then paused near a sealed maintenance hatch beneath the main deck. "That passage used to run 12 feet farther aft," he murmured. Emily looked up. The section had been rebuilt decades earlier. Few people outside the restoration team knew its original layout. Mercer did not notice her expression. "Nothing," he said after reading the screen. "No Walter Hayes. No veteran credential. No invitation from the Admiral's office." He stepped closer and raised the dog tag so the gathered sailors could see it. "You walk into a restricted ceremony wearing another man's identity, and you expect us to believe you belong here?" Walter finally extended his hand. "Give it back." Mercer studied the bent metal, then the old man's worn coat. "This looks like something bought at a flea market." The wind snapped the flags above them. Walter's face did not change, but his voice dropped until everyone nearby had to lean into the silence to hear it. "Captain, you can question me. You can remove me. But do not call the name of a dead sailor a lie." For several seconds, no one moved. The band near the gangway had stopped tuning, leaving only the gulls and the steady slap of water against the pilings. Captain Ryan Mercer looked around and realized that nearly 24 sailors were watching him. Their attention did not soften his expression. It hardened it. Authority, in his mind, depended on certainty, and certainty could not allow an old man with no invitation to stand at the center of a restricted military ceremony holding another sailor's name. "Petty Officer Brooks," he said, "contact base security." Emily hesitated. "Captain, there may be another way to verify him." Mercer turned toward her. "You already verified him. He is not on the list." Walter kept his hand extended. The bent tag swung lightly between Mercer's fingers, catching a thin blade of sunlight across its scorched edge. "Give it back," Walter said again. His tone carried no threat, only the quiet weight of a request that should not have needed repeating. Mercer placed the tag against Walter's open palm, but he did not release it. "You understand how this looks," he said. "A man arrives without credentials, carrying the identification of a dead officer, claiming personal access to an admiral. People have been arrested for less. Walter's eyes shifted from Mercer to the ship. People have been forgotten for less, too. Emily heard the words. So did Chief Petty Officer Mark Dalton, standing near the visitor barricade. Dalton had spent 24 years in the Navy, long enough to recognize when silence came from confusion and when it came from discipline. The old man's stillness was not uncertainty. It was restraint. Mercer finally released the tag. Walter tucked it beneath his coat and folded the yellowed envelope carefully inside his hand. Who was Daniel Caldwell? Mercer asked. Walter did not answer immediately. The question seemed to travel somewhere far beyond the pier. A lieutenant, he said at last. That much is printed on the metal, Mercer replied. I am asking what he was to you. Walter looked at him then. A man who kept his word. Mercer exhaled through his nose. And you expect Admiral Caldwell to interrupt a national ceremony because you brought him an old story? No, Walter said. I expect him to read a letter. Emily glanced toward the envelope. The paper looked older than she was, its seal marked by a faint circular stain. In the upper corner, barely visible beneath years of wear, were the typed words United States Ship Halcyon. Something tightened in her chest. She knew the name, though she could not remember why. Mercer raised his hand toward two security officers approaching from the far end of the pier. This is over. Walter turned slightly, and his gaze settled once more on the sealed hatch beneath the main deck. They closed that passage after the fire, he said quietly. Emily looked from him to the ship. The official restoration plans listed no fire. Mercer followed her eyes. What are you talking about? Walter touched the dog tag beneath his coat, his thumb finding the bend without looking. The part your records left out. The two security officers slowed as they approached, sensing the tension before anyone explained it. Captain Ryan Mercer pointed toward Walter without taking his eyes off him. Escort this gentleman beyond the restricted perimeter. Do not allow him back without verified credentials. One officer stepped forward, but Chief Petty Officer Mark Dalton raised a hand. Captain, permission to ask one question first. Mercer's jaw tightened. Make it quick. Dalton faced Walter. Sir, when were you aboard the Halcyon? Walter studied him for a moment, as though deciding whether the question had been asked with respect or suspicion. November of 1972. Emily Brooks felt the memory click into place. She had seen the ship's name in an archived briefing during restoration research. The Halcyon had been listed as a communications vessel retired after an electrical accident. Most of the operational record remained sealed. There was no recorded fire, Mercer said. There was an equipment failure. Walter's gaze returned to the hatch beneath the main deck. That is what the report called it. Mercer folded his arms. And now you are claiming the Navy falsified records? I am saying records can be written to protect a mission. The answer drew a low murmur from the sailors nearby. Mercer heard it and mistook their interest for a challenge to his command. He stepped closer until only a few feet separated him from Walter. You have given us no proof that you served aboard that vessel. Walter reached inside his coat. Both security officers shifted, but he moved slowly and produced only the yellowed envelope. He held it between them. This was given to me below the waterline, less than 4 minutes before the evacuation order. Mercer looked at the faded typing in the corner. Anyone could have found old stationery. Not with that seal, Emily said. Mercer turned sharply. She pointed to the pale circular mark pressed into the paper. It is an internal command stamp. The pattern was discontinued before 1975. Walter looked at her with the first trace of approval he had shown anyone. Mercer took the envelope, turning it beneath the sunlight. It is still not enough. His thumb moved toward the brittle flap. Walter closed his hand around Mercer's wrist. The motion was controlled, almost gentle, but immediate. Every nearby sailor went still. "That letter is not yours to open," Walter said. Mercer pulled free, his face coloring beneath the brim of his cap. "Do not touch me again. Then do not touch what was entrusted to me." The security officers moved closer. Walter returned the envelope to his coat, and as the fabric shifted, the bent dog tag slipped into view. Mercer caught it before it fell. He stared at the warped metal, then held it up with open disbelief. "This is your evidence? A damaged tag and an envelope nobody can verify?" He turned it over before Walter could stop him. "Daniel Caldwell. You expect us to believe you carried this for more than 50 years? Walter's expression changed. Not anger. Something older. Something heavy enough to silence the peer. "I carried more than the tag." Mercer gave a dry laugh. "Then perhaps you should have brought facts instead of theater." Walter took one slow step forward. "Captain, that bend was made when a steel bulkhead came down between 7 sailors and the only way out. The man whose name you are holding made sure the others went first." Emily looked at the blackened edge, then at Walter's steady hand. The tag had not been damaged by age. It had been shaped by a moment someone had tried very hard to erase. Mercer extended it toward him, but his voice remained cold. "Take it and leave." Walter did not reach for it. "You accused me of stealing from the dead," he said. "Now you will hear who gave it to me." Walter's thumb found the scorched edge of the tag, and the bright pier seemed to recede around him. The brass instruments, the gulls, the footsteps on steel all thinned into a distant hum. In their place came the low vibration of an old ship pushing through black water beneath a moonless sky. November, 1972. The United States ship Halcyon carried no name on the reports that mattered, only a number and a route marked by coordinates few men were cleared to see. Walter had been 28 then, a machinist's mate with steady hands and a reputation for hearing trouble before gauges admitted it existed. Lieutenant Daniel Caldwell had been the officer who trusted that instinct. He was 34, lean, deliberate, and known for remembering the hometown of every sailor under his command. That night, the Halcyon was running without deck lights when the first alarm sounded below. Not an explosion. Not at first. A deep metallic groan traveled through the passageway, followed by the sharp smell of heated wiring and oil. Warning lights turned the corridor red. A voice ordered the forward section sealed. Another voice reported that 7 sailors were still inside. Walter remembered Daniel reaching the bulkhead before anyone else. The steel door had dropped halfway and stopped, leaving a narrow opening less than 3 feet high. Smoke rolled through it in slow gray bands. Daniel looked at Walter once. No speech. No argument. They both understood. Walter braced a maintenance bar beneath the door while Daniel crawled through and guided the trapped sailors back one by one. The ship listed several degrees to port. Pipes trembled overhead. Somewhere beyond the compartment, machinery wound down with a long, dying whine. The opening narrowed inch by inch. 6 sailors made it through. Daniel returned for the 7th, a 19-year-old radioman whose ankle had been caught beneath a storage frame. By the time they reached the bulkhead, the maintenance bar had begun to bend. Walter pushed upward with both shoulders while Daniel sent the young sailor through first. Then the deck shifted. The bulkhead dropped another inch, catching Daniel's dog tag against the steel and folding it sharply across the center. Walter pulled him clear, but Daniel did not rise. He remained seated against the passage wall, breathing slowly, one hand closed around the bent tag. "The others?" he asked. "All 7, Walter told him. Daniel nodded, as if that answer settled something greater than his own condition. From inside his jacket, he removed a sealed envelope marked with the Halcyon's internal command stamp. "My boy is called Tommy," he said. His voice was calm, though the alarms continued around them. "He is 12. He thinks I chose this ship over him." Walter knelt beside him. "You can tell him yourself. Daniel gave the faintest smile. We both know better than to make promises the sea may collect. He pressed the envelope and the damaged tag into Walter's palm. When this mission is no longer a secret, find him. The memory released Walter as suddenly as it had taken him. Sunlight returned to Pier 12. Captain Mercer still held the tag, but the confidence in his face had begun to fracture. Walter reached out and closed his fingers around the metal. Lieutenant Caldwell gave it to me after every man under his command was safe, he said. Emily Brooks stared at the old command stamp on the envelope. Chief Dalton lowered his head. Mercer glanced toward the approaching security officers, then back at Walter. There is no record of any of that. Walter slipped the tag beneath his coat. That was the point. Emily had already moved to her tablet. Her fingers flew across the screen as she searched the restricted archive index. A single entry appeared beneath the name Halcyon, almost entirely redacted. At the bottom was one line that made her stop breathing for a moment. Final compartment evacuation supervised by Lieutenant Daniel Caldwell and machinists mate Walter Hayes. She looked up at Walter, then toward the main deck where Admiral Thomas Caldwell was preparing to speak. Captain, she said quietly, we need to call the Admiral's office now. Emily turned the tablet toward Captain Mercer. The archive entry was only 3 lines long, but Walter Hayes's name sat there in clean white letters beside Daniel Caldwell's. For the first time that morning, Mercer had no immediate answer. He read the line twice, then glanced toward the main deck, where rows of officers were taking their seats beneath the signal flags. An index entry does not prove his story, he said, though the certainty had drained from his voice. Emily lowered her tone. It proves he was there. Chief Dalton stepped closer and studied the screen. And it proves the Navy buried the details. Mercer looked at the sailors gathered near the checkpoint. Their faces had changed. Minutes earlier, they had seen an inconvenient old man delaying a ceremony. Now they saw someone whose past had been hidden behind black bars and sealed files. Mercer straightened his shoulders. No one contacts the Admiral directly without authorization. Emily met his gaze. Then authorize it. The words landed harder. Because she spoke them without challenge. She was asking him to choose between protecting procedure and correcting a mistake. Mercer looked at Walter. Why did you wait more than 50 years? Walter's hand rested over the envelope inside his coat. Because Lieutenant Caldwell asked me to wait until the mission was no longer secret. The records were partially released 12 years ago. Partially, Walter said. His family was still protected by the seal, and every address I found had gone cold. The wind moved across the pier, carrying the smell of salt, diesel fuel, and fresh paint. Walter's gaze settled on the destroyer's hull. I wrote to naval offices. Veterans groups. Old shipmates. Most letters came back unopened. Some disappeared into departments that no longer existed. Last month, a clerk at the archive sent me a notice. The final personnel restriction had been lifted. He drew out the yellowed envelope but kept it close to his chest. That was when I learned Tommy Caldwell had become an admiral. Emily looked toward the stage. A large portrait stood beside the podium, showing a young Lieutenant Daniel Caldwell in dress whites. Below it, in gold lettering, were the words duty before self. Walter saw the portrait and became very still. That picture was taken 3 weeks before the Halcyon sailed, he said. Mercer followed his gaze. The Admiral's speech is about his father. Then he should have this before he gives it. A boatswain's whistle sounded from the ship, announcing that the ceremony would begin in 10 minutes. The security officers waited for Mercer's decision. He stared at the archive entry, then at the old man he had nearly removed from the pier. Pride told him to maintain control. Training told him to verify every claim. Something quieter told him that the moment had already moved beyond both. Petty Officer Brooks, he said at last, contact the Admiral's aide. Use the priority channel. Emily stepped away and opened the secure line. It rang once. A crisp voice answered. Office of Admiral Caldwell. Emily identified herself, then looked at Walter's dog tag. Sir, I am at Pier 12 with a man named Walter Hayes. He has an item belonging to Lieutenant Daniel Caldwell. Silence filled the line. Repeat that name, the aide said. Walter Hayes. The response came lower now. Do not let him leave. The aide's warning changed the air around the checkpoint. Emily lowered the tablet, and even Captain Mercer seemed to understand that the situation had moved beyond his authority. How does he know the name? Mercer asked. Emily kept the secure line open. Sir, the Admiral's office is requesting confirmation. Walter removed the dog tag once more. This time, no one reached for it. He held it flat against his palm while Emily read the service number aloud. The aide repeated each digit, then asked about the mark along the lower edge. Walter answered before Emily could. A small diagonal cut, made with a file. Silence followed. On the main deck, Admiral Thomas Caldwell stood behind the podium while an announcer reviewed the order of ceremony. Rows of officers waited beneath the morning sun. Caldwell held a folded speech in one hand, but his attention had drifted toward the portrait of his father beside him. He had seen that photograph all his life. As a child, he had studied the confident face and wondered why duty had taken the man away. As an officer, he had taught himself not to ask. His chief of staff approached from behind the stage and spoke close to his ear. Admiral, your aide has Petty Officer Brooks on the priority line. She is with Walter Hayes. Caldwell's hand tightened around the speech. Where? Pier 12 security. Is he carrying a dog tag? The chief of staff nodded. Caldwell looked toward the distant checkpoint, though the crowd and equipment blocked his view. Ask about the cut. The answer reached him seconds later. A diagonal mark along the lower edge. Caldwell closed his eyes. When he was 8 years old, he had watched his father file that mark into one of two identical tags at the kitchen table. Daniel Caldwell had smiled and explained that sailors needed ways to tell important things apart. Thomas had forgotten the words, but not the soft scrape of metal beneath the file. Sir, the master of ceremonies whispered, we begin in 5 minutes. Caldwell handed him the folded speech. Delay it. The officer blinked. For how long? Until I return. Back at the checkpoint, Walter watched movement begin on the ship. An aide stepped away from the stage. 2 senior officers followed. Then Admiral Caldwell himself descended the gangway without waiting for the ceremonial escort. The nearby sailors straightened instinctively. Mercer turned pale. He is coming here. Walter said nothing. His thumb rested over the bend in the tag. Emily studied him. Did you know he would recognize the cut? His father said he might. You remembered that for 54 years. Walter looked toward the approaching Admiral. Some instructions do not fade. Mercer removed his cap, then seemed unsure whether he should replace it. The confidence that had carried him through the morning had become something smaller and more honest. Mr. Hayes, he said, I may have made a serious mistake. Walter kept his eyes ahead. You made several. Mercer accepted the words without protest. Admiral Caldwell crossed the final stretch of pier with measured steps. His uniform caught the hard sunlight, but his face carried none of the public composure from the stage. He stopped 3 feet from Walter. For a long moment, neither man spoke. Caldwell looked at the old coat, the sealed envelope, and finally the bent tag resting in Walter's palm. Mr. Hayes, he said quietly, I have been waiting most of my life to meet you. Admiral Thomas Caldwell did not offer his hand. Not yet. His eyes remained fixed on the dog tag resting in Walter's palm, as though the bent metal had opened a door he had spent decades trying not to see. Around them, the pier had fallen silent. Sailors stood at attention. Officers who had followed Caldwell from the stage stopped several yards away, uncertain whether they were witnessing a reunion, an investigation, or something far more private. Caldwell reached for the tag with both hands. Walter let him take it. The Admiral turned it toward the sunlight and found the diagonal cut along the lower edge. His thumb passed over the mark once, slowly. "He made this at our kitchen table," Caldwell said. His voice had lost the formal strength used for commands and public speeches. "My mother told him the two tags looked exactly alike. He said important things should have a mark no one else understood." Walter watched him without interruption. Caldwell turned the tag over. The engraved name was worn, but still clear. Lieutenant Daniel Caldwell. A faint line appeared between the Admiral's eyes. "There is something I need to ask you." Walter already knew the question. He had carried it alongside the letter for more than half a century. "Ask." Caldwell closed his fingers around the tag. "Was my father afraid?" Captain Mercer lowered his gaze. Emily Brooke stopped breathing for a moment. No official biography, memorial plaque, or sealed naval report could answer what the Admiral had just asked. Only the old man standing before him could. Walter looked past Caldwell toward the ship and the signal flags pulling hard in the wind. "He was worried about his men," he said. "He was worried about you. He did not spend his final minutes thinking about himself." Caldwell's jaw tightened. "What did he say about me?" Walter removed the envelope from inside his coat. The paper trembled lightly in the breeze, though his hand remained steady. "That belongs in here." He extended it, but Caldwell did not take it immediately. "Why did you keep it sealed?" "Because it was not written to me." The Admiral accepted the envelope with the care of someone receiving an object far heavier than paper. His eyes moved over the old command stamp and the faded name written across the front. "Thomas Caldwell." "Not Admiral." "Not Sir." "Just Tommy," crossed out once and replaced in Daniel's careful handwriting with Thomas. Caldwell traced the letters. "My mother died believing there had been no final message. The mission remained classified," Walter said. "We were ordered not to discuss the Halcyon, not even with the families. By the time the first restrictions were lifted, your mother was gone, and you had been transferred overseas." Caldwell looked up. "You searched for us?" "Every few years. Every time another file opened." The Admiral's eyes shifted toward Captain Mercer. "And this man was being removed from the pier?" Mercer stepped forward. "Admiral, I accepted the guest list and the available records as complete. I challenged his claim and handled the situation poorly." Caldwell's expression remained controlled. "Poorly is a generous word." Mercer stood straighter. "Yes, Admiral." Walter looked at Caldwell. "The captain made a mistake. Do not let his mistake become the important thing today." Caldwell studied him, then looked down at the envelope again. "You protected my father's men. You carried his last message. And after all these years, you are protecting the officer who insulted you." Walter's eyes rested on Mercer for only a second. "A uniform is supposed to teach a man. Sometimes the lesson comes late." Caldwell nodded once. Then he broke the seal. The paper unfolded with a dry whisper that seemed louder than the wind. Admiral Thomas Caldwell held it beneath the morning light, his hands steady from decades of command, yet the first line stopped him completely. "Dear Tommy," it began. The name belonged to a 12-year-old boy, not the 4-star officer standing on Pier 12. Caldwell read in silence. No one around him moved. The sailors nearest the checkpoint lowered their eyes, giving him the privacy that distance could not provide. Walter watched the Admiral's face rather than the letter. He saw the years fall away one sentence at a time. Daniel Caldwell had written that his son might someday believe the sea mattered more than home. He asked him not to carry that belief. Duty had taken him away, but love had brought him back in every quiet moment, in every remembered baseball game, every unfinished model ship, every bedtime promise interrupted by orders. Then came the final line. "Tell Tommy I did not leave him. I was trying to bring my men home." Caldwell read it twice. His lips moved the second time, but no sound emerged. The signal flag snapped above the destroyer. Farther down the pier, the crowd waiting for the ceremony had gone quiet as word spread that the Admiral had stopped everything for an unknown visitor. Caldwell folded the letter along its original creases and pressed it against his chest. When he looked at Walter again, the distance between Admiral and old machinist had vanished. "He saved them?" Caldwell asked. "He made sure all 7 crossed before he did," Walter replied. The official report listed 6 survivors. The 7th was transferred under another operation name. That part stayed sealed longer. Caldwell turned toward his chief of staff. "Open every remaining halcyon file. I want the names of every sailor in that compartment restored to the public record." "Yes, Admiral." Caldwell then faced Captain Mercer. The young officer stood rigid, his earlier confidence replaced by the knowledge that every careless word had been heard by the son of the man he had dismissed. "Captain," Caldwell said, "you called Mr. Hayes's evidence theater." Mercer swallowed. "Yes, Admiral." "You suggested he had taken this tag from a dead sailor." "Yes, Admiral." Caldwell's voice remained low. "That restraint made it heavier. The man standing before you carried my father's final promise for 54 years. He searched for my family while the Navy gave him silence. He came here without medals, an escort, or a place on your screen, and you decided that meant he had no place at all." Mercer removed his cap. "Mr. Hayes, I was wrong. I treated you without the respect your service and your character deserved. I am sorry." Walter studied him. "Remember the mistake longer than the embarrassment." Mercer nodded. "I will." Caldwell stepped back, returned the folded letter to its envelope, and placed the bent tag in Walter's palm. Then he brought his heels together. The sound was small against the enormous ship, but every sailor heard it. Admiral Thomas Caldwell raised his hand in a precise salute. Chief Dalton followed. Emily followed. Mercer followed. Across the pier, officers turned toward Walter and lifted their hands as one. Walter stood beneath the moving flags, an old man in a faded coat receiving the honor he had never requested. After a long moment, he returned the salute. Caldwell lowered his hand and said, "Mr. Hayes, my father has finally come home." The salute ended, but the silence remained. It stretched across Pier 12, through the rows of sailors, past the cameras, and up the gray steel side of the Resolute. Walter Hayes lowered his hand slowly. For more than half a century, he had carried Daniel Caldwell's name through moves, illnesses, closed offices, unanswered letters, and the steady narrowing of time. Now the burden no longer belonged to him alone. Admiral Thomas Caldwell looked toward the waiting stage, where his prepared speech still rested beside his father's portrait. "The ceremony will continue," he said, "but not as planned." He turned to Walter. "You will stand with me." Walter shook his head once. "I came to deliver the letter." "And you did." Caldwell held the envelope against his chest. "Now I am asking you to help me tell the truth." The walk from the checkpoint to the main stage took less than 2 minutes, but every person on the pier watched it. The Admiral moved at Walter's pace. Emily Brooks followed several steps behind, carrying the tablet with the newly found halcyon record. Chief Dalton walked beside Captain Mercer, who kept his cap beneath one arm and his eyes forward. No one announced Walter's arrival. No music played. The crowd rose anyway. Caldwell reached the podium and placed the bent dog tag beside the microphone. Its darkened edge looked small against the polished wood, yet nothing on the stage carried more weight. "Today," he began, "I intended to speak about duty as I understood it from official history." He looked toward Walter. That history was incomplete. He told them about the Halcyon, the 7 sailors led out of the sealed compartment, and the lieutenant who stayed until every man under his command had crossed. He told them about Walter Hayes, who had obeyed an order of silence without abandoning a promise. Then he read his father's final sentence. The words moved through the crowd without drama. They did not need it. When Caldwell finished, he turned to Walter and asked him to place the tag in the ship's heritage case. Walter examined the bend one last time. "Do not repair it," he said. "I would never," Caldwell replied. "That is the part people need to see." Captain Mercer stepped forward after the ceremony. This time, he did not stand like an officer addressing a civilian. He stood like a student before a man who had given him a lesson he would not forget. "Mr. Hayes, I will make sure your name is added to the guest record and the ship's history." Walter looked at him. "Add the 7 men first." Mercer nodded. "All 7. Weeks later, the heritage case aboard the Resolute held the scorched tag, Daniel's letter, and the restored names from the Halcyon compartment. Walter's name appeared last by his own request. Beneath the display was one short line chosen by Admiral Caldwell: "Some things return home only because someone refuses to forget." On quiet mornings, sailors paused before the case. Most noticed the name. The wiser ones noticed the bend. It remained exactly as the steel had left it, imperfect and undeniable, carrying the truth farther than any polished metal ever could.